we all know other elected officials and even other parts of the state and other parts of the country that are being um, really severely um, challenged because of higher employee costs and no growth. And so we're very fortunate to,
And inflation.
and inflation, to be in this part of the upstate and this part of the country where we do see growth. I would challenge this council um, to not, and I don't foresee it in our future, but to not depend on growth. I mean, we've got to efficiently manage it, and we've been in situations where we have not had to raise taxes in millage. So we'll knock on wood and hopefully keep going forward.
In that case, I would move that we adopt this budget.
Have a first by Mr. Lockridge.
Second.
Second by Mr. John Roberts. Any further comments or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously on the second and final reading.
Thank you.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
David, your team, thank you. Our next item of old business is request second reading of ordinance 23-09 authorizing the execution of easements to Duke Energy Carolinas LLC across city property at 314 Tribble Street and 301 I Street. Mr. McEwen.
Okay, these are two different electrical improvements Duke Energy is planning on acting on. One's just across the street at Tribble Street. They have the electrical substation there. Of course, the Duke Energy did own that property. It was with the water system when we acquired the water system. They're upgrading some of the poles and then plan on putting a couple of different other features on there to help with power outages. So they needed to replace some poles right there, and that's basically sums up that one. It does not affect our operations or devalue our land in any way. And same with I Street. Essentially, they're replacing some poles. There's poles that they don't own. Slightly comes into a lot that we own, and that's the reason they're asking for that. And so we recommend and support both of these. We do look at them hard to make sure they don't affect our operations or devalue the land. In this case, I think it enhances the reliability of the electric grid, and we support it.
Thank you. Again, questions were asked. Any additional questions?
And we don't foresee the easements that we're given, we don't need those for access or anything. So having a non-exclusive, we don't need to have a shared access easement with them or anything, do we?
None of these.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Any other questions?
Make the motion we approve the easements.
Have a first by Mr. Newton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Lockridge. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously on the second and final reading. We'll get into our new business, and the first item of new business is request consideration of an ordinance to amend Article 13, landscaping and screening of the City of Anderson's zoning ordinance, and to repeal ordinance 2203 pertaining to tree preservation. Mr. McEwen.
This links to the comprehensive plan that we're currently working on, Plan This City, along with visioning of City Council and staff recommendations as we've seen a lot of growth in our area. So we do have a tree ordinance in place that we've had in place about a year now. It's been working effectively. This does make some changes to it, along with the putting in the landscape into this ordinance as well. So this was moved to the front because of what we're seeing and to make sure we have the highest quality of development. With that, I'll turn over to Mr. Maurice McKenzie, Plan Development Director, to go over the highlights of it.
Very good, thank you. As the city manager mentioned, we are moving forward with certain elements of the zoning ordinance, or ultimately it will become the Unified Development Ordinance once we move further down the road. But this is in part due to our comprehensive plan update. We're updating all of our guidelines, so to bring things more into modern standards. And landscaping, tree preservation, those are critical elements of our community's appearance. So enhancing those guidelines, that was identified as an area of immediate need. So we've worked with our consultant, Halsey Levine, to provide new content pertaining to Section 13 of the zoning ordinance, which is our landscaping and screening guidelines. And the last update was in 1998, so obviously our current guidelines are 25 years old. And development practices, our city priorities, they've all changed. So we're looking forward to making some more modern, user-friendly, easier to understand guidelines that will be also easier to enforce and also combined into one document. Right now, we have a tree preservation ordinance, as the city manager mentioned, that you adopted last year as a standalone ordinance, so we can take all of that language and combine it into one document. And that's where we're moving forward with now. And the new guidelines, I'll just touch on a few things that are the highlights. And the standards continue to apply to all development except for single-family detached development. That's for tree preservation. Also, all applicable developments continue to be required to receive approval of a tree plan, a tree permit prior to grading or construction activity. That's something that's taking place now, but that will continue. There will be distinct requirements for various sizes of undeveloped land in the guidelines. And also, again, this is tree preservation, but for developed sites and undeveloped sites, 10 acres or less in area, standards are established for the preservation and replacement of trees based on the tree type, and provides tree preservation incentives by allowing established trees to offset other landscape requirements. And for tree preservation also, standards apply to existing trees on properties only. Obviously, if there are no trees, there will be no planning requirements stemming from the tree preservation section, but we do have new landscaping standards that will apply, and I'll go over those in just a second. The tree removal penalty replacement rates are also updated in the new standards. Now, when it comes to the landscape guidelines, all landscape standards are consolidated into one chapter and simpler to follow, like I mentioned before. And the current landscape design standards are going to be replaced with standards for distinct landscape zones. We're talking about building foundations, parking area perimeters, the interior of parking areas, transition zones, residential buffers, and residential streetscape. In our current guidelines, we have elements of that all around, but nothing that's been delineated individual like that, so this will be easier to follow for those that are doing development inside the city. And specific statements are included in this section to clarify how the guidelines apply to various elements of development. Now, that's landscaping, that's tree preservation. Also, we have a screening section that's included in this document. Current screening standards are replaced with specific standards for grease traps, trash recycling receptacles, ground and wall-mounted mechanical units, roof-mounted mechanical units, loading docks, truck parking areas, those items that we typically see or could be unsightly on certain developments. Also, we have some sidewalks and walkway language in the ordinance. The proposed standards do not replace any existing standards because we didn't really touch on that very much in the existing standards, but the new standards for the provision of public sidewalks and on-site pedestrian walkways will be proposed in this section of the zoning ordinance. And again, this is section 13 dealing with landscaping, tree preservation. Ultimately, we're undergoing a complete revision, and that will be considered in the upcoming months. We'll have a complete unified development ordinance to bring to you. Now, this did go before the Planning Commission at their June 6th meeting. They did recommend approval of this language and to move forward with adopting Article 13. And also, by doing so, we'll make mention of, again, you implemented an ordinance 2203 last year for tree preservation last April. This, if adopted, will repeal that ordinance since those standards will be incorporated into Article 13 in our zoning ordinance. So again, it will be all consolidated into one. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. And we did have just public knowledge, a work session that started at 5 where we did talk in great detail about the Article 13, but I would again, open it up to any other questions that may have come to mind since then.
Mayor, I'll
Mr.
just make a
Martinez.
comment. For those that are listening and that are in attendance, this is no easy feat or task. There's a lot of thought that goes in to putting in a comprehensive plan like this. The good thing is for people to know is that a lot of this feedback comes from not only what council sees, but from the constituents that live in our neighborhoods and the things that they'd like to see. So I just want to thank the people that have spent time on trying to develop a plan like this, because this will only make our city better.
Any other comments, questions? Mr. Roberts? Jeff
I'll
Roberts.
pose a question, really. Have you ever ridden through a neighborhood or a city or a particular street, and it's just beautiful, and you can't really put your finger on it? And I think this is a good example of what that is all about. You know it's there, but you can't really say why. And I think tree preservation and landscaping is a key to that. And I am a proponent of this.
Any other comments, questions?
Echo Mr. Roberts' words immensely. That's right. Makes a difference.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. With that, I propose we adopt this on first reading.
Thank you. We have a first by Mr. Jeff Roberts,
Second.
second by Mr. John Roberts. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously on the first reading. Our next item on the agenda was a request consideration of an ordinance to amend Article 12 signage of the City of Anderson zoning ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, due to our discussion that we had a while ago, I would like to see a continuance of this item on the agenda and schedule it for another meeting.
Thank you. We have a first by Mr. Lockridge for a continuance.
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Newton. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Our third item of new business is request consideration of a resolution adopting the Anderson and Oconee County multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. Ms. McEwen?
Okay, it sounds like it is a lot, because it is a lot. A lot of work was put together in putting this together and updating the plan. And Mr. Adam Cromer is here, our stormwater manager for the city, and he can talk about the joint effort, and then specifically the city. Mr. Cromer.
Thank you, Mr. McEwen. To be eligible for hazard mitigation grant funding, the city must adopt a hazard mitigation plan. And fortunately for us, the county prepared a plan with our guidance and input, a 239-page hazard mitigation plan for Anderson and Oconee counties. Anderson County Council adopted the plan back on June 6, 2023. The plan provides mitigation strategies for natural hazards, including tornadoes, high winds, winter storms, hurricanes, hailstorms, thunderstorms, droughts, heat waves, earthquakes, wildfires, and floods. Some examples of some of the strategies in the plan the city has are being involved in the local emergency planning committee that reviews hazardous materials incidents throughout the county, updating our ordinances and regulations, stormwater ordinances, floodplain regulations, those type things. Our data backups, our cloud storage that we have in IT, our updating our building codes, regulations as applicable, evaluating water and sewer infrastructure improvements, capital projects, community meetings, tabletop exercises, and things such as generators. For example, our utilities getting ready to present a plan to the for a grant for a generator for one of the wastewater treatment plants coming up. This plan, adopting this plan, must be completed prior to them being able to apply for that grant. Undertaking these hazard mitigation actions before disasters occur will reduce the potential for harm to people and property and save taxpayer dollars. Staff recommends approval of the resolution to adopt the Anderson and Oconee Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan as previously adopted by Anderson County Council.
And I'll add to that, thank you, Mr. Crumber, that the federal government, FEMA, and then down to our State Emergency Management Division requires the local counties and municipalities to adopt a hazard mitigation plan, and also makes you eligible for certain federal monies that come down from the federal government to the state level, and we haven't applied for a grant. They come and go with the opportunity to do that. If your state hasn't experienced a disaster, which South Carolina's faced many over the last 4 years, many named storms from hurricanes, it makes the entire state eligible for it. It has to meet a certain threshold. Then the grants get opened up to that state. And so we're in a window of opportunity, so we are putting in for a mitigation grant there to help with if in the failure of power at the wastewater plant, we can still continue to operate that plant, particularly if it was during that would be very important, also if it was during a high rain event. So we have put in for that. That's one of the biggest things they funded throughout the state is generators. It's been a big category they've been funding, so I think we have a good opportunity at it, and so we'll know, and it's a lengthy process, so probably 8-10 months we'll know if we receive the grant or not, but we recommend approving this.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Sounds like a good thing. You hope you never are involved in a disaster, but they happen.
Mayor, I move we adopt this multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan.
First by Mr. Jeff Roberts,
Second.
second by Mr. Martinez. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Crowman. The resolution passes unanimously. Our next item of new business is request consideration of a construction contract for Heritage Hills drainage improvements. I'd say that with the recent rains, we obviously have a lot of drainage problems throughout the city, the county, the state, the nation. And I think we'll let Ms. McEwen give an executive summary of this particular item, but I think we all got a email last Wednesday, late Wednesday, from a homeowner here in town, and maybe during the course of, maybe before our discussion after the executive, we can, I think they're here today, and we can let them have the floor. Ms. McEwen?
Okay, thank you. As you're aware, we're not a regulated stormwater utility in the state, enacted it as well. It's fairly still new. It's improvements that are continuing to happen as cities come online or are mandated to become a stormwater utility. However, you know, it was a mandate to become one, and prior to that, you had the city was built out, and so there's a lot of missing components to stormwater, particularly in the 60s. And with that, projects have been identified, and we've had a long list of them. The American Rescue Plan Act, the federal funds that came our way, has been a very good thing for us. It has alleviated a lot of rate increases we would have had if you wanted to fund all the projects on the list. This is one of the projects that was on our list, and we were able to fund with the American Rescue Plan monies. And with that, Mr. Cromer here will go over the details of the project itself. And if you would, Mr. Cromer, talk a little bit about the histories of the 60s and then when we actually became a stormwater utility. I think that background would be important as we were able to start doing projects and to make improvements. And also our city engineers here tonight as well. Mr. Cromer.
Sure. Mayor and Council, Heritage Hills subdivision, it's more commonly, you may know the streets, Old Ivy, Old Colony, Williamsburg Drive, portion of Marchbanks Avenue just off of Calhoun Street, adjacent to Cox Creek. It was developed back in the late 1960s prior to any stormwater quantity regulations from the federal and state governments. Those came later in the late 70s and even into the early 2000s, state and federal regulations dealing with water quantity. So this neighborhood was built during that time when everything just drains, pretty much ditches, creeks, pipes, that kind of thing. No stormwater detention throughout the neighborhood, which is consistent with other neighborhoods along Cox Creek. During heavy rains, the citizens in this area and along Calhoun Street during heavy rains have experienced drainage issues and structural flooding of homes. We had Ridgewater Engineering Survey, a local firm here in Anderson, prepare civil site plans and specifications and bid out the project to replace 383 feet of corrugated metal pipe, install 291 feet of 24-inch pipe, and 557 feet of 18-inch pipe up Old Ivy Road to alleviate some of those drainage issues. We advertised bids through the SCIBO, Anderson Independent Mail, and the city website. We had a pre-bid meeting on June the 6th. That was attended by 2 contractors. We received 3 bids from Southern Concrete and Construction, Foothills Contracting, and J&M Construction, all local firms to our area. The low bid was with Southern Concrete for $180,453. In reviewing the bids and kind of thinking about the project a little bit more, we're asking for a 20% contingency for some unforeseen issues. It'd be utility conflicts that might arise. There's a lot of water, sewer, gas lines adjacent to where we'll be working down Old Ivy Road. So we're requesting you approve a contract with Southern Concrete in an amount not to exceed $216,543.60.
Thank you. Let's ask questions right now. Any questions, comments?
Mayor, I'll say this is in my district. I've received many calls over the last couple of weeks. You know, certainly that entire Calhoun, really anything that's near Cox Creek in that area does experience a tremendous amount of retainage of water. I went out to a few homes in the last week, and you know, a lot of these houses have French drains and other things that they put in place to try to mitigate some of this water that gets there during these rains. And I know you hear the term 100-year floods, but they're coming a lot more frequent than 100 years, at least recently. So I'm glad to see that we're addressing, you know, some of the concern here.
Any other question for Ms. Cromer?
Mayor, one question. Mr. Cromer, this does not address at all the stormwater retention. So, and it looks like going with this type of smooth wall pipe is going to speed up velocities and get it to the creek even quicker.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Deal with it downstream somewhere later?
I'm sorry.
We'll deal with it downstream sometime later?
Well, for example, just last week when we had the flooding, Cox Creek comes up out of its banks, floods out. We're close to Cox Creek there. Any detention, there's not really room for it. You've got one vacant property right there adjacent to it. The majority of that property that it's outfalling into is in a floodplain, so it's one of those you can't really. It's getting there, but we're conveying in a pipe versus the ditches and whatnot. It's not working right now.
And I wanted to clarify too, if our city engineer or Adam could clarify too for us, this terminology, and Mr. Roberts, of course you're an engineer as well, but the terminology of 100-year flood, just since the public's listening to that, what that means, and really from a hydraulic calculation, because it's a design standard. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that means from an engineering perspective when you look at this?
Sure. I'll give an example. Last week, as we were investigating drainage issues during the rainfall event, we had the intensity that was recorded on a local rain gauge in the Lindell Road area was 4 inches an hour intensity of rainfall a substantial amount. And as we were looking at drainage issues, looking at streets that were flooded, Rantiles Road, Old Colony Road, we noticed on the 100-year flood maps that FEMA provides that a lot of those areas were doing exactly what the flood maps indicate they should do. And so that is kind of a, explanation of how that occurred during that rain event as far as the.
Well, and 100-year floodplains though are misnomers, right? So it's really hitting at the frequency or the likelihood of that storm volume expected over a period of time, right?
Right, and it's a 1% chance that you'll have that type of rain event in a year, during the calendar year, and you also got a 1.1% chance that you'll have it, so it's.
Yeah.
A lot of jurisdictions, FEMA included, are switching the naming of that from 100-year floodplain, or 100-year flood, 1,000-year flood, 500-year flood, that sort of thing, to the 1% annual chance, which is a 100-year flood. So it really speaks more to percentage, not actuality of occurring in 100 years, right?
And then, of course, we built to that, so the design standards of what the size of the pipe should be, and then the planning around the Cox Creek Basin, and where it flooded over. In many areas, it was designed for that, for it to flood over. The only thing in there was a stormwater sewer pipe, not a stormwater sewer pipe, but our sewer pipe following it. So with that, it's definitely just wanted to explain that a little bit farther, especially when Columbia had all that, and you're talking about 1,000-year flood, and they experienced all that. Plus, they had many more issues that same year. So it's the terminology is a little confusing. So we wanted to have our folks explain that a little bit better.
There's a difference between a floodplain and a floodway, or is these properties in both of them, or in one or the other? Or do you know that? Because some properties can be in a floodway, but not in a floodplain, and both of them could be in a floodplain and not a floodway. Are these in both a floodplain and a floodway, or?
No, these are in, what are along Cox Creek are in the floodplain, not the floodway.
So this is actually a subdivision that just drains to Cox Creek. That is not in it. It's uphill. And so it just doesn't have, it just has ditches and there's a few pipes in some areas, but this was just a proactive identification to help improve the stormwater in that area, in that neighborhood at least. I know you're familiar with it.
Lucretia, you have some?
I was going to address the flood, I was going to help Adam to address the floodplain. Down Old Colony, those houses on the Cox Creek side, those are all in the floodplain. Most of those houses are. And they did exactly what the flood map suggests during a storm. But up Old Ivy and all that, none of that is in the floodplain. It's elevation-wise, it's just way too high. It just, the way the water goes now, it goes across people's yards and their backyards and settles out as yards have been graded and whatnot. So just trying to get it off of them a little faster.
Ms. Lockett?
It sort of came up when Mr. Roberts was discussing speeding the water up. Why are we not putting a retention pond in that area and slowing it down?
So if it was a new subdivision, you would have the room to do that and
just
build
don't have the room.
that out, but
There
it's completely built
There's no
out.
place to do
There
it.
is nowhere further. There's no empty lots. We don't own any, and it's right there. This is, the floodplain ends at this road and everything within the couple of blocks next to it. So we don't have any easements over anything out there, and there's just, this is really the best you can offer at this juncture. So,
Gotcha.
and retention that close to the floodplain, you gotta have a whole lot of area to make.
You're just trying to
make
get
any
rid of the
difference.
water.
Yes.
What I would like to do, and I don't want to stop the conversation, and we can still have this conversation before we take action on item 4, but I would like to give Ms. Gaines an opportunity to come to the podium. And again, state that I think we all got this email on Wednesday afternoon. And I think our guys have talked to Ms. Gaines.
That's
too.
great.
And go ahead, Dave.
Mr. Cromer and our city engineer visited Ms. Gaines at her house to
Okay.
take a look at it.
Ms. Gaines, if you would, I think you live at, tell us where you live.
I live at 1406 East Calhoun Street.
Okay, thank you.
As I'm sure all of you have seen my email and my videos and my pictures and everything that I've dealt with within the past year. I understand that there is things that occur over a certain period of time. But I purchased this home within a year and was not aware of anything about a floodplain, whatever y'all were discussing. So within my year's time of living at this residence, I've experienced heavy rains throughout the year, and I don't know if that's something that has just progressively happened over time, but like my first incident was a heavy downpour, and it flooded the one side of my, well, it didn't necessarily flood. There's a trench on one side, on the side of my home that is wooded that goes to that creek that we're referring to. And of course, during that heavy rain, it flooded and it kind of came over the trench. And my air conditioning unit sits right there, and I believe the water shorted my air conditioner out. That was my first incident. And then the second incident is where I believe that's where I picked up for, in my email, where the heavy water, heavy downpour of rain flooded the sewer drain system. And I called the city out because it backed up into my pipes in my water at home. I called the city out, and they said I had a plumbing issue, which for me to call a plumber. I called that plumber. The plumber came out and ran snakes, couldn't find anything, and eventually he went out and found, looked in the manhole, and it was backed up in the manhole. He called the city out, and the city came out and drained the manholes and put it back in the creek, or however that goes, I don't know. But that incident itself cost me $250, where if the city did their job in the first place, I wouldn't have had to pay that out. The second incident, every time it rains, I just get anxiety, which last night I got anxiety again during the downpour. And I, of course, recorded there was a river coming in my front yard, right in my front door, and then the trenches started filling up. And at this point, I'm just scared that it's just gonna flood my home again. Like, I have kids, they live with me. I'm dealing with backed up sewer drains and floods and everything else, and I gotta deal with this with my kids in the home. But I don't, at this point, I'm at a loss.
Mm-hmm.
My property is damaged because of things that should have been done or could have been said to me that I could have avoided. But right now, I feel like I'm at a loss, and at this point, I don't know where to go. And I really hope to God y'all go ahead and approve that plan, but it doesn't fix what I've already had lost right now.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, you go ahead.
My name is Dolores Gaines, and I'm Macy Gaines' mother. This is her first time being a homeowner, and it's hitting her harder than she ever expected. And her problem now is she's afraid to even be in the house. No one made her aware of what has transpired. No one has said to her that that was a low-lying area or that she even needed flood insurance. So with that being said, each time it rained and has flooded her house, she has had to go out and buy all new stuff all over again. It's including bedding. She had to have time off work. I even took time off work because we had to pump water that first time all night long. And with just a wet vac, it was causing us to work. And I'm not saying it just to make her story look any greater or less value, but it was just a mess. And if we hadn't been doing that, it would have been worse inside than what it was. So it is really a problem. And there's debris all around the house that needs to be removed. There's, the trenches need to be redug up so the water can have an even flow, and maybe even terracottas might need to be put in place for that water to flow even, better. So with that being said, she's right now wanting to move. So she would lose all the equity that she's had in her house by just walking away from it. And I don't think that would be great for her. It would ruin her credit for one. And then, it's beyond her. So
I'm just, like I said, at this point, I'm at a loss. If they need more area for this, the water is already going in my yard anyway. So just at this point, if they need more area, knock down their house and let it sit right there. I can't continue doing all this work and dealing with the water and the sewer and not having, it's just really frustrating.
I understand, and again, we did receive your email, and we want to thank you for coming out and describing that to us. And y'all can, Mr. McEwen, do you have any comments or anything?
Yes, I mean, this, first, I'm very sorry about the conditions. I
think we all are very sorry.
The video and looked at the pictures, and it's heartbreaking. It's a very tough circumstance, and I'm very sympathetic towards it. This project in particular here was proactively identified by our team to help with the subdivision that was built, of course, much earlier. And it's a great project. Look forward to putting this project in. I'm glad we were able to fund it through federal monies. And there's then the state, that's a state road, also in East Calhoun Street, and it's a ditch line and basically just flows just straight downhill to Cox Creek. So we've been in communication with DOT over that particular area. This project will certainly help. There's also some things that we should probably look at on the specific property. And I know Adam and Mr. Cromer and our city engineer, LaCrucia, are always willing to continue the conversation, and they're here to help out. And so I'm glad they were able to visit it, take a look at it, and review the photos as well. And we'll certainly try to help out where we can.
What's the timeline on this project?
You want to provide the timeline, Mr. Cromer, on getting it started with this project?
Sure. If y'all award the contract tonight, Southern Concrete, the low bidder, they're located just downstream of this property on Old Williamson Road and Gossett Street. They indicated that, they would go ahead and start ordering material this week as soon as material's in, get started within the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Any questions, any additional comments?
I do have one.
Ms. Lockhart?
This will help her situation?
Yes, sir. It will help alleviate some of the runoff that's coming there. There's water coming off of Marchbanks Avenue. There's a church up there around Rosemary.
Yeah, that's where it is.
Water's coming down there, and it's currently going just pretty much 3 properties down, and it's making a 90-degree turn going off into the backyards between Old Ivy Road and Calhoun Street.
Yeah.
So we're going to be eliminating that turn that's making that 90-degree turn. So
Okay.
lot of, or it's about 9 acres that's draining, just making that right-hand turn and going back behind the property. So, eliminating that, getting it in a pipe down Old Ivy where it should go, should help alleviate some of those flooding issues back there. I can't say it'll eliminate all of them, because I think there's other issues on that site, as he mentioned, with, DOT within their right-of-way.
Let me ask this question. Do we know, and just like Ms. Gaines' property, do we know if there's other properties in that vicinity to where if an insurance company was to go out and make an assessment, or a mortgage holder, like a bank, would they require flood insurance on that property based on topography or anything like that?
Probably, I mean, I would say that Insurance 101, I look at John Roberts, every piece of property technically is in a flood zone. I mean, those are the maps. You just get to your degree of severity, the closer you get to a threat. And so mortgage companies lending money on those really severe flood zone positions would require flood insurance. Outside of that, it's optional.
And I'll give an example of that. The road name doesn't come to my mind, but right from off the East Greenville Street, Walgreens, all the new houses that were just built 4 or 5 of them. Rain Tolls Road. You're familiar with those? They were built in the flood zone, the FEMA flood zone, but they knew that building the house, and so the builder elevated the house, and so it was we have documentation of the pictures of it. The elevation obviously worked. It didn't get into the house floor or affected in any way. It just affected their yard, but they're elevated, right? And the builder knew that going into it. And then when they sold that home and they transferred it, or they're renting it out, not sure what the condition is for each one as far as, who's a homeowner, who's a renter, but they're made aware of that by the builder. And so I know we talked to one gentleman out there, and he was aware of it, and understood that they're in a flood area, and that he needed to just go get his garbage can that floated away and that kind of thing. But ultimately his house was protected because the flood maps did their job. They identified the property. It was made to be elevated. The builder still continued. I think most people would probably not build in it, maybe, but the builder decided to do it and elevate the property, just like the coast. You build in those areas and you elevate the house. So it was done very similar to that. And we get a couple of examples like that around the city. But a lot of times it comes down to the due diligence of the builder and what they take a look at. And then I can't speak to the insurance companies, but.
Well, I'll just say this. I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't think this is a period. This is an and situation. We'll continue to look and survey and trust that the city is going to make this a priority. So with that being said, I make the motion that we award the bid to Southern Concrete and Construction in the amount of $180,453.
Second.
First by Mr. Martinez, second by Mr. Lockridge.
Question.
Mr. Stewart?
I think the contract, Mr. Martinez, if you don't mind amending it, was for the not to exceed the 216 instead of the 180, because they put
The contingency.
had the contingency on there. Would you amend?
Yeah,
the motion?
I amend the motion.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
So the motion has been amended to the 216 for 543.60.
I second it.
You second that amendment. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? That passes unanimously. Our last item of new business is request consideration of a food service contract for the detention center. Mr. McEwen?
Okay, as you're aware, and I made the public aware as well, we operate a detention facility that consists of numerous inmates from city, state, and federal. With that, we average about 110 prisoners per day, and we manage contracts for certain services for the detention facility. Mr. Chief Stewart is here. The detention facility falls under the Anderson Police Department, and they administer the detention center. And Chief Stewart, you want to go over this item in your request?
Thank you, Mr. McEwen. We did go through a request for proposal for the inmate food services. We released that bid out on April 3rd. It was due back by April 25th, and we had a bid opening. You see the 3 bids that we received. Trinity, who is our current meal provider, they do all the work in the kitchen for breakfast, lunch, and supper. We have state trustees that deliver the food, clean up, and clean all the trays and all that. This is strictly for cooking the food. There has been a price increase, as well as all increases in the industry, but we would stick with the same vendor that we had last time. This is also meets dietary standards for the Bureau of Prisons and the U.S. Marshals.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions, comments?
Make a motion that we accept the bid for Trinity for the food services for our detention department in the amount of $254,751.75.
First by Mr. Stewart,
Second.
second by Mr. Martinez. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
First by Mr. Newton. Second by Mr. Jeff Roberts. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.
I'd like to just take a moment and thank the staff and fellow council members for their thoughts and prayers during our lunch. So appreciate you coming today, Frank. It really meant a lot to you, Councilman Ross.